Units from Hamilton and New Lambton went to the Bailey Street house at about 9:45. Firefighters quickly doused the flames in the weatherboard dwelling, but the rear section was destroyed. The rest of the building suffered smoke and water damage. The fire is being treated as suspicious after strong fumes from an accelerant were noticed. Detectives are investigating possible links between last night's blaze and a suspicious fire 2 weeks ago which destroyed the house next door. On the Central Coast, fire units rushed to a house at Canwell, north of Wyong, where they took half an hour to bring the blaze under control. 3 rooms were extensively damaged, but the occupants escaped uninjured. Investigators sifted through the smouldering remains. They think a burning candle or incense may have sparked the blaze. Amanda Bolger, NBN News.
The merger of Orion and Sydney Electricity has sparked massive job cuts. 1,000 workers will go across the board over the next 2 to 3 years. The Electrical Trades Union received a staff letter warning of the cuts. All the redundancies will be on a voluntary basis. No one will be forced to leave.
The losses will mainly be in the admin area, the contraction of the administration and accounts and what have you.
No one from Orion was available for an on-camera comment. However, a spokesperson said there were no details yet as to the exact numbers of people to go from their Newcastle or Hunter offices. It's believed the merger of the power distributors will mean cost reductions of up to 30%. The union is accepting the move as progress.
Ultimately, for the country, it'll be a good thing because there'll be competition, there'll be reduction in cost for the energy, and that will be the benefit of anyone.
Peter Ryan, NBN News. Changes have already come in the new station at Newcastle University, forcing a revised timetable for most City Rail services. A public meeting was called today for any interested people to make comment on the changes.
To say, OK, this is the current timetable. While it's fresh, it's only 2 or 3 days old. Give us some feedback. What do you think? How can we improve it?
Only a few people turned up. One concern was a lack of coordination between rail services and buses. Another meeting is called for 7 tonight at the Gallipoli Legion Club in Hamilton. It may be a sign of the usage of City Rail services in Newcastle. Thousands of people responded to a similar change on a line in Sydney. Just 100 k's today from Vales Point Power Station to Munmora Power Station on the Central Coast. But this was no cruise, this was tough work with a killer leg ahead to test even these champions. A group of 7 made a break, including Kiwi Stephen Swart, and then they hit Brumble Hill in the Yarramalong Valley. It was painful work. Many of the more fancied riders fell back, including 1992 winner Mike Weisman and Switzerland's Olivier Sen. It was a lot easier coming down, although race stewards had to cut back the pace on some dangerous corners. Out in front, and Germany's Stefan Gosling and Swart were fighting it out, Swart taking on some last-minute advice. But Gosling was first over the line with Swart second. Swart's finish, however, was enough for him to take the overall lead from English rider Lillywhite. Peter Ryan, NBN News. It was an historic occasion, the last sorting of the mail for delivery at Newcastle Post Office after 87 years. More than 50,000 letters and parcels passed through this office each day, some of the packages not what you may expect.
So I opened a rather small package, had a little bit of suspicion about it, it had a little bit of smell about it, opened it up and had about a 4-foot dead black snake in it.
10 inner city post offices are moving their mail delivery sections to a new base in Hamilton. The offices themselves will remain open for their across-the-counter transactions. After a lifetime of early starts, Don Warby has called it a day.
When the alarm doesn't go off at 3:45, which it has done for the last 35 years, I'll be thinking, gee, I shouldn't be here. But it'll take a bit of adjusting.
At Merriweather, 55-year-old postie Mick McGlynn posted his last letter today. He's moving out with the changes after nearly 40 years of service. Mick was the only postman left at Merriweather to ride a push bike.
It was a bonfire to rival all others. The tons of timber erupting into an unstoppable front of fire. Reinforcements were rushed from Newcastle and Sydney. Firefighters clawing at the corrugated iron shell of the building to get at the blaze, but they'd lost the battle before it had begun.
Well, it concerns us that we only got the one core, which means it hasn't been burning for that long.
The owners of Walker Brothers Mill could only watch as their 68-year-old family business burnt to the ground. Daylight saw heavy smoke replaced by heavy machinery. Little left of the building that's insured for more than $4 million.
All those sheds I built, it's a bit of a worry seeing them burn down.
The 48 staff have volunteered to work for nothing to rebuild the mill.
Disbelief, shock, uncertainty, confusion, a whole range of emotions.
The devastation left few clues, but arson is suspected, with the bin believed to have been set alight at the rear of the building. Richard O'Leary, NBN News.
The truck rolled on the Pacific Highway north of Karoo at 9:30 last night, spilling its load of watermelons. The driver, who was heading south, wasn't injured, and it seemed like a routine operation to right the vehicle this morning. However, as this crane was being used to lift the truck, the turntable came loose and the arm collapsed onto the highway, and that created all sorts of problems. Around 30 litres of hydraulic oil leaked from the disabled crane. The highway was partially blocked for most of the day, while the fire brigade was contacted and the roadway cleared. The EPA also attended, making sure the oil didn't flow into a waterway. The Rutherford owner of the crane believes it may have been metal fatigue which caused the problem. And last night, a 17-year-old was trapped in the cabin of his truck for around an hour and a half. The truck crashed into a tree on a private road off the Putty Road, around 90 kilometres south of Singleton. The ambulance rescue crew had to travel from the Hunter Valley town to reach the crash site. It then took half an hour to free the young man who was trapped by his leg. He was taken to Singleton Hospital and then transferred to John Hunter in Newcastle.
The 118-kilometre leg from Wollongong to Kiama started without drama, the cyclist travelling through some beautiful and unusual surroundings. The pace began to quicken as the riders prepared for Macquarie Pass, but it wasn't long before trouble hit. Jeremy Hunt and Max Van Heeswick have shadowed each other for most of the race, but this time they got too close. Hunt needed attention from doctors. Van Heeswick continued on, though he was obviously in pain. By this stage, all of the riders needed a boost. But the biggest shock was for race leader Stephen Swart crashing off the road. He didn't recover from the mishap, leaving the way for Germany's Ralf Grapsch to take the race. Van Heeswyck takes on the overall lead. Peter Ryan, NBN News.
The fierce pace up front suiting the stablemate of Our Maze K, Quality Gold, saluting at 16-1. Moss Rocket, ridden by Cessnock's Robert Thompson, was the 10-9 favourite, with the Kevin Burns trained 5-year-old now to contest the Salinger Stakes on Derby Day next Saturday. In Sydney, a promising Newcastle 2-year-old Flapper, in the green colours on the rail, was contesting the Silver Slipper. Flapper weakened to finish fourth, with trainer Max Lees likely to set the filly for the Magic Millions on the Gold Coast. The second last day of the Classic started without overnight leader Max Van Heeswyck, who was unable to take his place in the field after a fall yesterday. Englishman Chris Lillywhite once again assumed the yellow jersey for the 154-kilometre trek, which was dominated early by Sweden's Michael Anderson. He was out on his own for more than 100 kilometres, winning 2 of the King of the Mountain climbs. But the pack eventually reeled him in, with AIS rider Kelvin Martin making his move with 20 k's remaining. He was joined by Bob Ulick and Tanner, but fought back again in the last kilometre to win the stage. The 1200k Classic finishes with stage 14 from Goulburn to Canberra, followed by a criterium tomorrow afternoon.
Under Aboriginal custom, the smoking of the HAMAS Newcastle will cleanse and protect all on board. The crew members receiving an individual blessing before Aboriginal elders purified the frigate. The coming together of different cultures, a symbolic gesture of goodwill between both parties. The strength of the friendship reflected in the exchange of gifts and hugs at the end of the ceremony on Newcastle Harbour.
We thought it would be a wonderful thing to embrace as part of the reconciliation process, but also to try and educate our own people into some Aboriginal culture.
Today was another step forward in linking and joining hands and coming together with the HMAS Newcastle and the Menfolk aboard.
It follows the presentation of an Aboriginal flag to the frigate when it was first commissioned 2 years ago. Richard O'Leary, NBN News.
A day's rock climbing on the difficult cliff faces of Tomaree Headland ended in tragedy for 3 friends, all members of the RAAF. Killed 24-year-old Gary John Deegan from Ipswich in Queensland, who was stationed at Sydney's Richmond RAF base.
It was approximately 25 metres above a rock shelf, and apparently he grabbed hold of a rock that became dislodged and subsequently fell that distance to the rock shelf, and we believe was killed instantly.
Although equipped with rock climbing equipment, the men had been making a final untethered ascent just before dark yesterday. Police described the area as inaccessible and dangerous with loose boulders and rocks.
A lot of boulders and loose material on the side of the rock face.
With their friend lying dead with massive head injuries on the rock shelf below, the two other climbers, both in their 20s and from Williamtown RAF base, attempted to climb out for help. One became snagged on a ledge, and when rescuers arrived, they decided it was safer to stay put, to wait out the night and the electrical storms which swept the area.
It was decided that it would be a lot safer to get the helicopter in during daylight hours.
The body of the fallen climber was recovered this morning, and the stranded man was airlifted to safety. Andrew Lobb, NBN News. Les Darcy came from a poor farming family, but by 17 was on his way to becoming a boxing great. By the age of 20, he'd won more than 40 major bouts, 20 by knockout. Some said he'd turned his back on his country when he stowed away to box in the United States. He died overseas of illness, and more than 40,000 people attended his funeral in Maitland. The city has now opened a permanent exhibition of boxing memorabilia and looks to honour the great with a statue.
In those days, any fight that took place outside of America didn't exist as far as the Yanks were concerned. They had all the world champions. But he beat every claimant to the world title in middleweight, in title fights too, and those he didn't beat were beaten by blokes he did beat. He was definitely the best middleweight in the world in his time, and he won the world title. No risk in the world, he won it.
It's a bigger problem than many people want to contemplate, the replacement of the Hunter's thousands of kilometres of underground water pipe as it reaches the end of its working life.
The pipes in Newcastle are up to 120 years old, and it's predicted that, say, in the next 30 to 50 years, over $1 billion will have to be spent by the governments around the country repairing the water mains that we have.
Barry Watkins, a student at the University of Newcastle, has designed a way of stress testing pipe and hopefully translating his findings back to the real thing.
Pipes are replaced when they fail. Now, I'm trying to predict when these pipes will fail so they can be repaired ahead of time.
This length of cast iron pipe has been buried under a road used by coal trucks. Electrodes feed back information on what loads the pipe is subjected to and may help predict when it and others like it will reach breaking point.
Like most dumps these days, space is precious at the Awabba tip, and so is a lot of the material being left there, according to Lake Macquarie Council. So with local contractors, it's set up a new resource recovery centre to help salvage the items that can be recycled or processed for reuse.
One man's trash is another man's treasure, and everything's sort of recyclable if you look at it in the long term.
The hope is that people using the tip will stop first at the centre to drop off anything suitable for recycling. Council's keen to make residents assume more responsibility for their waste.
If I make the garbage, then I have to think twice about what I do with it. So if I can find another use for it, or provide or take it to a place where there is a person who can find another use for it, then in a sense it's my responsibility to assist this program.
Boasting 7 internationals, Sydney United had several early opportunities through Milic, who should have put them ahead in the 15th minute. No mistakes at the other end, with captain David Lowe's fearsome strike falling for Jason Bennett. Milic went some way to redeeming himself in the 38th minute when he supplied the cross for Mark Redan to head past Carter. But the goalkeeper's acrobatics kept the Breakers level at half-time. The deadlock wasn't broken until a determined charge from Troy Halpin. He left 3 plays in his wake before the 4th brought him down, earning a penalty which was converted from the spot by David Lowe. In search of the draw, Sydney United finished as they started. Their unluckiest moment came in the final stages when the ball came off the woodwork twice.
The woodwork's there to hold the nets up. If you don't hit the ball in between the post and the crossbar, it doesn't go in, does it?
The Breakers' first win leaves them in equal 8th position on the table with United. The victory giving them plenty of confidence for Friday's home clash against defending premiers, the Melbourne Knights.
Yeah, I was over the moon about it, and so were the boys. It was an important victory for the club, you know, in terms of points on the table, but also psychologically.
The call to keep wool sales in country centres came as Newcastle prepared for its most important sale of the year. It will generate hundreds of thousands of dollars for the city.
A very big effect if you only have a look at around the people who have generated money into the Newcastle area this week. The motels are completely booked out.
Growers have also reacted angrily, saying they won't be able to go to Sydney for the sales. They claim it will also deprive them of a showcase for the finest fleeces in the country.
If they sit down and do their sums, Newcastle comes out so far ahead it's not funny.
Newcastle is the superfine mecca centre of the world. We sell some of the best wools in the world.
The drought reduced the number of bales by more than 30% for today's sale, but the quality was high. The best spring in more than a decade in the premium wool growing area of the New England has increased confidence, which meant good prices. Walker farmer John McLaren set the standard. His wool snapped up at more than $29 a kilo. But wool with extra dust due to the drought did suffer. Most of the premium wool will be exported to Italy for suits, but last night Australian designers showed what they could do with the fibre. The show attracted more than 200 guests with the Wool Do It Australia collection, a locally grown, owned and designed product. Richard O'Leary, NBN News. Snake handler Stephen Blanchard was demonstrating how to milk a tiger snake at the Australian Reptile Park on the Central Coast when he was forced to give the class a quick lesson on how to treat a bite.
He was picking it up and it swung around and bit him on the hand.
He sort of remained very calm and I don't think everyone realised what had happened for a while, and he just continued to say, and by the way, I've just been bitten and now we'll show you what you do in a first aid situation, and got his bandage and bandaged his hand up and sent the other chap to sort of go and get help.
But the man's condition quickly deteriorated. The 23-year-old rushed to Gosford Hospital in a serious condition. The park and hospital supply of anti-venom was quickly exhausted. Doctors forced to send for an emergency batch from Wyong. The man's condition has now stabilised. In a strange irony, it's possible that the very work that nearly brought him undone may have saved his life. Mr Blanchard has spent the last 3 years at the park milking snakes of venom, which is then converted to anti-venom.
The Australian Reptile Park produces a lot of snake venoms for the Commonwealth Serum Laboratories for their anti-venom production. And of course during that process there are fundamental risks that are involved.
Richard O'Leary, NBN News. It's called an atomic force microscope, making even the smallest things look larger than life.
It works like this needle of an old gramophone. So it gently rubs over a surface, and as it's rubbed over that surface, it's deflected up and down depending upon whether it registers a high area or a low area. And we record that as a three-dimensional picture.
Newcastle University's Dr Simon Biggs will be the guide through this exploration of the atom.
Monitoring early stages of weathering of surfaces, for instance, such as a paint surface on the outside of your house, trying to determine at what stage that paint surface begins to break down.
This information will help manufacturers to identify faulty products earlier, saving time and money. The microscope will also be used to study the relationship between particles, which could mean not only whiter walls, but whiter teeth.
One very interesting application, I guess, is in the adherence of bacteria to teeth. If we can prevent bacteria from adhering to our teeth, then of course we can prevent dental caries.
Richard O'Leary, NBN News.
The crash happened just before 6 o'clock last night, 23 kilometres north of Inverell. 4 men, including 2 brothers, were returning from a fishing trip when their four-wheel drive towing a box trailer overturned and skidded metres on its roof before coming to rest in a ditch. Emergency services responded swiftly with a rescue helicopter called in from Lismore for one of the passengers, 32-year-old Inverell meat worker Peter Jennings, who had suffered serious spinal injuries. He was flown from the scene to the Princess Alexandria Spinal Unit in Brisbane. 2 other passengers suffered only minor injuries in the crash, but police were unable to locate the driver and combed bushland in the area. The search was suspended because of failing light, and the 28-year-old driver wasn't found until early this morning when he showed up at a nearby farmhouse. Police accident investigators are continuing their inquiries. Murray McCloskey, NBN News.
9-year-old Rice Lavender is one of many who will benefit from the nasometer, a machine which measures his voice, picks up the problems with his speech and points the experts in the right direction to correct it.
A boat tank. Tile turtle teddy.
1 in 600 babies are born with a cleft palate or a hole in the roof of the mouth. John Hunter Hospital is one of only 3 centres in the state that specialises in working with these children. $6,000 was raised by local businesses and community groups to buy the nasometer.
This machine is very important because it allows us to accurately measure the amount of air leak, and thus we can tell which children later on will need further surgery.
Still at the John Hunter, and the hospital's Kookaburra carers have been declared the highest fundraising country hospital auxiliary in the state by the Minister for Health, Dr Rafshorgi. The Kookaburra carers raised $100,000 through 1994-95 for the hospital.
It was in the early hours of Friday, November 3rd, 1989, that police found the badly beaten body of Stockton schoolgirl Lee Lee. She'd been at a party at a beach clubhouse. Police later charged Matthew Webster with her murder, another man with assault, and a youth who had sexual intercourse with her. But 6 years on, and the Newcastle University Legal Centre is pushing for the case to be reopened. Today, Solicitor John Borsick met with high-ranking police who are heading an inquiry into the matter. It's the first time in New South Wales that outside lawyers have been given access to confidential police documents.
We've been given access to material that solicitors for victims have not had access to prior to this kind of a matter, and I think that's making a real difference to what might be expected of victims of crime and of the role of the police and of prosecuting authorities.
The legal team is waiting for forensic photographs and police notebooks before putting together its submission, pushing for the case to be reopened.
What is important, I think, is the matter gets fully reinvestigated so that any cloud which may hang over this matter can be clarified.
Internal Affairs officers who are investigating the matter say they're keeping an open mind as to whether there's evidence against others who attended the party. The officers who are reporting directly to the Ombudsman say no decision on the case will be made until all information has been received and reviewed. Jodie McKay, NBN News.